Hello, this is the second screencast in a kind of short series that's going to show you how to use PDO to connect to a database and display that data on a web page. So we've already looked at connecting using PDO and displaying data in a simple form. So this one's going to take it a bit further, and what we're going to do is have two pages. One page that displays an HTML form where we can see a list of modules that the student might be studying, and you can select a module and click a button, click the submit button, and it will pass the information about the module code to a second script, and that second script will use that to display only the students who are studying that particular module. So in this example it's module and students, but it could be any two bits of related data. It could be, horses in a horse race, or tracks on a CD, or any two pieces of related data that you want to link together. So the way I start usually is with a plan, but I'll begin by just making an empty file. So although we're going to program in PHP, and this will be a PHP script, this particular PHP script is going to output HTML, and whilst probably the way I'd really do it is to make up lots of little functions that make up an HTML page, for simplicity's sake here I'm going to actually embed the HTML in with the PHP script. So I'm going to start a new HTML file rather than a PHP file, and I'm using an editor called PHP Storm. There are lots of different editors out there, and I alternate my allegiances. I like PHP Storm, I like NetBeans, I like Eclipse. PHP Edit I think is very good, Sublime Text is smashing, and there are lots of others available, but this is a really nice IDE, so I'm using this for the time being. So HTML file, well, I'm going to display modules and then list students. So I think I might call this display module form.html, and actually I can't remember if I need to put the HTML extension. This IDE might add it twice for me, and it might be called html.html. Oh no, it's not. So it's put the sort of basic framework of a web page there, so that's useful. And now I could move into PHP mode, which I'll do in a minute. But first of all, I'm going to make up a plan of things I'm going to do, because I always tend to work this way, and I would really encourage you to work that way as well. If you make a plan of action, it helps you see the commonality of steps between one program and another program, even though those programs might seem different, like displaying CDs and then linking to the tracks on the CD, rather than displaying modules and then linking to show the students on the module. If you write a plan, it helps you see the commonality, I think. So what are we going to do? Well, this particular part of the application is going to list modules in a form. So in order to list the modules, we're going to need to connect to a database. So connect to database. Let's do that first of all. List all the modules. Okay, so that's a plan as far as it goes, but I want to list all the modules as part of a form. So let's start a form. How am I going to list the modules? Well, I'm going to list them in some sort of select box. So start a select box. There's going to be more than one module, so I'm going to loop through the modules and create an option in my select box for each one. So I'm going to say loop through all modules and display each one as an option. Okay, end loop. Okay, well actually loop through all the modules, where have they come from? Okay, well actually if I'm connecting to the DB, I need to make an SQL statement that will display all of those modules. Make an SQL statement, and then I actually need to execute that SQL statement. So does that seem a good plan? So connect to the database, make an SQL statement, execute it. So now I've got all of the data. So now I could start the form, start a select box, loop through all the modules, display each one. Oh, I guess I need to end the select box, and then I need to end the form. Actually, no, I need to also display a submit button. And there'll probably be a few other things that I'll think of as I go, but that's probably a reasonable start. And I think it's really good to write that sort of plan, because you'll find yourself connecting to a database, making an SQL statement, executing the SQL statement, looping through all of whatever it is that you've got, displaying all of whatever it is you've got. Sometimes it might be inside a select box, but sometimes it might be inside a table. And I frequently do this as well, make horizontal space between this different kind of components of what I'm working on, because I think that adds clarity. Now, this stuff here, I'm going to make as PHP. Now, I know some of this I could write as just HTML, but once I'm in PHP, I like to kind of stay there and echo stuff out on the screen rather than jump back in and out of HTML to PHP, because I find it just easier, especially for debugging later. So I'm going to go into PHP mode by putting that there, and then this bit is at the end, is the end of PHP mode, and then all these parts are going to be comments. So in actual fact, if I can remember how to do it, I can probably highlight that, and in my code I can comment with a line comment. So, except it thinks it's HTML. Of course it does. You daft bugger. Look, what I've done is I've called it display module form.html, whereas although I'd created the file as an HTML file, I really should have saved it as a PHP file. So I'm going to save that, close it, and I'll see if I can just rename it from here rather than go to refactor, rename, and I'm going to call it PHP. And now when I reload that and I re-highlight that and I go code, comment with line comment, it'll put in PHP comments and not HTML comments. Okay, that's one of today's deliberate mistakes. I'm not going to say it's today's deliberate mistake, because undoubtedly I'll make others. Okay, connect to the database. So how am I going to do that? Well, with PDO it's fairly straightforward, and it really is almost just one or two lines of code. But inevitably I'm going to have other files that also need to connect to a database. So rather than repeat the code for connecting to a database just in this file, I'm going to create a quite separate file that's got all the connection information in it. That way, should that connection information change because I want to use a different database or whatever, I can just edit it in one place instead of having to go to every single file that has that repeated information. So I'm going to create a new file, except this time there's no HTML in this. So I'm going to create just a PHP, and I'm going to call it dbconnect.php. Okay, so what do I want to do? Well, I think what I'm going to do is make up a function that does this for me. So I'm going to call it dbconnect. Start my function in my function, and inside there I'm going to create a variable called db, and that's going to be a new PDO object. Now, as you know with PDO, and this is one of the advantages of using it, I can change the bit that comes next, which is the DNS, the DSN, the data source name, to make it easily connect to a SQLite table or database, MySQL database, any kind of database that I want. But I'm going to start off with a SQLite one because I just find it really convenient for testing. Now, you can see on the left hand side here, this is where I am, and this is the file that's going to connect to that. So from where this file is, in that same directory, I've got a DB directory inside which is my database. So in other words, a relative path to where the initiating file is, that's this one, not the DB connect that I'm in if that were in a different directory. We have to do it from where the start point is. I'm going to say, right, from the current directory, dot, you'll find a directory called DB, and inside there is a file called dbo students.sqlite. semicolon. So having made that connection, what this function is going to do, because all functions should usually return something, is it's going to return that database connection. Okay, so I'll click save and close that. So this file is going to connect to a database. So underneath that comment, I'm going to say how I'm going to do that. I'm going to use the command require once. There's require once, include, and include once. Include if there's a problem, including the file. Include will give you a warning, but the program will carry on running. Require, though, will throw an error and the program will stop running. So use include if what you're including is kind of trivial, like an advert that goes in the sidebar or something that's really non-critical for the application. But if, in this case, connecting to the database, it's fairly important. We don't want to carry on without a database connection. I'm going to use require. What's the difference between require and require once? Well, require once will, if I'd got several files in this suite of little application and each of them wanted a database connection and one of them has already got a database connection, we only want to require once, because that'll stop us duplicating the function definition. Because if we required the same file again, it would try to redefine what my function was, dbconnect, and we'd get an error. So whenever you're including or requiring something that contains function definitions, you always use require once. So what am I going to require? I'm going to require this file that I've called dbconnect. And so now that's given me access to that function that I defined. The function, if you remember, was also called dbconnect. So here I'm going to make up a variable which I'm going to call, well, for the sake of it, I'm going to also call db, but the fact that it's the same name means nothing. It's a different variable. And that is going to be equal my function that I call dbconnect. And it didn't pop up in that little list, so I'm just going to make sure I've not made another deliberate mistake, and it is called dbconnect. So I am correct in saying, actually it's called dbconnect, not getConnect, isn't it? dbconnect. I think I might change that to the get dbconnect, because that seems a bit of a better name. Get dbconnect. So let's try that again. I'm going to call get db. No, messed it up. There it is. Get dbconnect. So that's one of the nice things about a good IDE, is it prompts you, and because it didn't prompt me, it alerted me to the fact that I'd made another mistake. So now make an SQL statement. So my SQL for modules, I always tend to call it not just SQL, but SQL, whatever it is, equals something as a string. And it's going to be a select statement. Well, I'd be silly to just make one up there. It's always a good idea to test out your SQL statements to at least be assured that the SQL works. And if you get an error, it's not a problem with your SQL. So I'm using Firefox, and in Firefox there's an add-on that you can install called SQLite Manager, which I've already got open here. And SQLite Manager is smashing in that regard. You can just click open, navigate to a SQLite table, SQLite file rather, and load it, and then here is all of my data. So I want to look at modules. So let's have a look at what the data looks like. Look, I've got a module code and a module title and a module level. Well, all I want to do is list out the module code and the title, and I can store the module code in the select box value and the module title in the thing that it displays. So let's try some SQL. So remove what I've got before. Select m.module code m.module title. I think it's called module title. Let's have a look. Module code, module title, from X module, and now I'm pretending that it's called M so that I don't need to write X module.module code. I know in just a simple statement like this I don't need to bother prefixing these with the name of the table or with this, which is called an alias, but it's a habit I've got into because most of the time you're doing joins between tables, and so it's really useful in that context. So, and you've studied that elsewhere, so I'm not going to go into detail. So let's have a look at what happens there. So I'm running that, and that's okay, except these are not in alphabetical order, and it would be nice if they were. So let's make them ordered by module title, and run the SQL, and now they're in alphabetical order. So I'm going to take that SQL, copy it, come back to my editor, and paste it in there. So I know that SQL works and I haven't got a problem. So now I've got to execute that particular SQL statement. So I'm going to create a variable to hold the return value from this execution, which I'm going to call statement, because that's what PDO gives me back. And I'm going to use my database object, and I'm going to call a method built into that database object called query. And what query expects is, as it's popping up on the screen in front of you from the hints, a statement in the form of a string. Well, my SQL statement in the form of a string is SQL modules. So what that will do is execute that SQL and give me back a statement. So now what I want to do is start the form. So I'm just simply going to echo form. And you know there's certain things we must have, one of which is action equals and the name of a file in somewhere. Actually, I'm expecting that to, and it didn't do it. One of the editors I've got, if I put another double quote, it automatically does that and escapes a double quote inside a double quote. In actual fact, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use a single quote. So the action will be list students.php, even though I haven't yet written that, but that's what's going to happen in the next step. And this form, for testing, I'm going to use method equals get. And that's that. So end that particular line. Right, start a select box. So echo select name equals in quotes. So what am I going to pass? I'm going to pass the module code to the list student, so I can use the module code to find all the students in that particular module. So I might as well name it module code, and you'll see the reason why it's good to use certain sensible names as this progresses. So select is that, and close my end the line. Sorry, I'm sort of thinking, I'm hesitating. So now what I'm going to do is loop through all of the particular modules. So in other words, I need a while loop of some description. In a brace, and although that's automatically put in a closed brace, I'm going to remove that to put the closed brace there where my comment is. I always do that, put the end loop in straight away, especially if it's somewhere else. So I'm minimizing the way I can make mistakes. Okay, now what I've got now is I've got this statement object, which in other words has given me, if I switch back here, this kind of data set. It's got the whole record set, and what I need to do though is fetch one of these at a time, one row at a time. Now with PDO you can use it in lots of different ways, but I find the easiest way to use it is in this kind of object-oriented mode. So what I'm going to use is a method called fetch object, and it's going to fetch me back an individual module if on the statement object I use its method, which is called fetch object. There it is. And I can pass various parameters in or arguments into fetch object and make it behave in a different way, but at the minute none of those are relevant, so I don't need to do those. And then display each one as an option. Well, let's maybe take a small sidetrack and remind ourselves what an option in a select box is meant to look like. What am I doing? I'm making up a new HTML file, and I'll just call it test, and I'm just do the select part. So select, look, normally you obviously give it a name. I'll just call it test, because again, I'm not bothered about that. And then in here, the way you normally do it is you have an option, and the option normally has a value, and it's the value that's the thing that's passed. So that's normally a code of some description. And then inside here you have the actual description, and that's the thing that the user sees on the screen. And then you usually have one of these for every thing that the user picks from. So this is the kind of output that I want to produce. Option value equals a code and then the description. So I'm going to just nick one of those and use that as my echo inside double quotes. And I wish I'd used single quotes in that previous one, because then I would have much less of a problem, because at the minute, look, I've got double quotes inside my double quote here, and I can't have that. So I've got two choices. I could either use a backslash to escape that, meaning please print this out as a literal character, or I could just go with the flow and change it to a single quote because I'm inside double quotes. It's important here to have double quotes on the outside rather than single quotes, because I could have put single quotes and then double quotes, but if you have double quotes, it means if you embed a variable, that variable will be what's known as interpolated. In other words, its value will be displayed. If you use a single quote, then if you put dollar something or other, your variable, it will just literally say dollar and whatever your variable is. So here I want to put the code, and here I want to put the description. Well, the code is in this thing called module code, and I've got an object here called module. So what I want to display is my module object and a property of that module object that's called module code. Now, this isn't a simple, straightforward variable, so it makes it much easier for PHP, that is, if we enclose that complicated variable inside braces. It helps delineate that that's the variable that we're talking about. Okay, so and I'm going to do the same here. Instead of description, I'm going to put braces, and I'm going to say module, and then minus greater than, because this is this property of the module title. This minus greater than is the way you refer to both the property of a module, or it's the way you call a method of, a property of an object, or it's the way you call a method of an object. Method of an object. So that should loop around displaying all that lot, and then we need to end the select box. So echo the end select and display a submit button. So echo input type equals submit. It doesn't need a value, it doesn't need a name. Actually, it does need a value because that will be the thing that appears in the. So find students. I'm sort of muttering a lot today. I'm not really doing very well on the whole kind of eloquent talking front. Must start taking the tablets, whatever it is. That's probably the clue. So now I've got to end the form. End the form. So what I need to do now is test that out and find out where I've gone wrong, because I'll undoubtedly have gone wrong somewhere. So Control S, or in this case Command S, because I'm on a Mac, to save that, and let's test it. So here underneath this, I'm actually running a local web server, which again is outside the scope of this particular demonstration. If you're using Windows, you could use WAMP or XAMPP, I think there's one called, but I kind of like WAMP. And if you're on a Mac, you can use MAMP, or you can download one directly using an add-in manager called Homebrew, but you can find out that for yourself. So I'm going to just refresh this page, and that's my display module form, and let's see what happens. Whoa, no mistakes, no errors, and that's a list of my modules. Let's view the source on this page and see what happens. Whoops, well, that's not so very easy to read, is it? Because it's all on one line. Okay, I mean, it doesn't render on one line because the HTML makes it display correctly, but the source is all on one line. So let's go back and do something about that. Whenever you echo something, if I want the next line to be on a new line, I can use \n, providing I'm in double quotes. This is a bit like a variable. If I'm in double quotes, I can use \n. And then here I'm going to use \t for tabbing in, and then also \n at the end of that line to put that on a new line. And then here I am echoing through the modules, so I'm going to \t for a tab, and \n, and \n, and \n, and \n, and let's see how we go. Save that, go back to here, view source, and refresh that page of source. So the \t made that indent. I put two \t's there to make that indent, and the \n put this on a new line. It's really helpful to have your source indented correctly, because apart from anything else, we want to validate this later on as HTML. And the way we'd done it before, if we had an error, it would have said error on line 8, and line 8 would have been the entirety of the program and wouldn't have picked up on a mistake. But notice how the value is the code, and it's the word that's actually the descriptor. So let's see what happens next. So say I choose this one, advanced databases, and I click find. It calls whatever the action was on the form, which isn't found because it doesn't exist yet. So list students was the action on my form there. Action, list students. And what's it passed? It's passed the module code. Where did the word module code come from? Well, it was the name I gave to the select object. And the reason I call it module code is because that's a good description of the data it's passing. So it's question mark module code equals that. So in the next video, what we're going to do is pick out this module code from the request stream and use it as part of a where clause to only display the students on that particular module. Okay, so hope that was useful. Key points to remember: always make up a plan in the form of comments, and then write the code to match those comments. If you've made a mistake, as you will do, well, little by little you can alter your comments and refine your code. But writing comments really helps you understand the commonality between what might otherwise appear to be quite distinct and different tasks, and that will be helpful to you. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.